Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Tree Lady Talks with Callum Fro. I just wanted to take some time at the beginning of this podcast to say thank you so much for listening and watching. So, this particular episode has some amazing images from Callum. So, I recommend that number one, you download this on audio to help our figures. And then number two, head over to our YouTube channel at that's it. Curly A, Tree Lady Talks. And if you go on to this episode, you'll be able to see simultaneously the incredible images of the tech that he uses. So go over there, and when you do, could you subscribe, please? Because that will really help us. Well, we've been absolutely overwhelmed by the downloads we've been having recently on the podcast, and our chart positions are climbing. And that's all down to you, you lovely listeners. And I wondered, would you be interested in Tree Lady Writes, a weekly newsletter coming into your inbox full of facts to do with the tree world and a synopsis of what the episode is about? And this is also a great opportunity to showcase what you as the community are doing. So it's free to advertise your event. So do get in touch with us. Either DM me on LinkedIn or email treeladytalks@gmail.com because we want to serve you. And during the middle of this episode is such an advertisement for Julian Forbes-Laird, friend of the show, on his forthcoming seminar. So listen out to that halfway through. So, welcome to Callum Thoreau from ARB Innovators UK. Callum, welcome to Tree Lady Talks.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks for having me, Sharon. It's an honour and a privilege. And yeah, I'll say to start off with that, I've listened to your podcast for a while, and I think what you're doing with the podcast and the quality of guests is great in not just for the industry, but also bringing people outside the industry to understand more about what it is we do. What we need all the help we can get. So yeah, thanks
Well,
very
we
much.
certainly do. That's very, very kind of you. And I have had some lovely emails from people who've gone into industry because they've heard a bit on Tree Lady Talks. So now we're talking about AI and technology.
Mm-hmm.
I'm 57, and I'm embarrassed to say that I haven't rushed towards this. I mean, my least favourite phrase is unexpected bagging item in shopping area. I think I've even got that wrong. And so I really, really need this. So we're hearing about AI all the time, and it strikes me it's a tool that can be used for the good and also for the bad, and there needs to be
Yeah.
regulation. But we're really talking about AI in terms of arboriculture and our daily work. So I'm going to start off really about forms of AI. Can you talk to us about how us ordinary folks can dip our toe into it knowingly?
Yeah, so I think to like clarify to start off with, for people that don't know me, I'm not an expert in AI and photogrammetry and all those sort of things. I talk about them a lot, and I think people often mistake that I, count myself as some sort of expert, but I don't ever want to be an expert in anything. So we'll say that from the start. But essentially, AI, artificial intelligence, is actually nothing new. It's been around for decades. I mean, artificial intelligence or machine learning has been around since the 1950s and got sort of more wide scale adoption in probably the 70s and 80s. I mean, if you think of things like your mortgage loan application or an application for a loan, and to check whether you're worthy of being given that loan, so you'll go through a series of questions like, are you a smoker? Do you regularly exercise? All those sort of things are essentially a process, and that's been worked out from a sort of quite sophisticated calculation to go, if you fit in this criteria, you're worthy of this loan. If not, then essentially we're going to have to say no. So that's a form of AI. Same with like predictive text on your phone. We often overlook that, but when you're typing a message and it tries to prompt you, it's trying to work out your phrasing and terminology and go, I think this is the next word you're going to use. So it's been around for some time. When we look at forestry, I think forestry, it's had sort of it's been utilising AI much better than arboriculture, in the sense that forestry has been using drones and AI to sort of map deforestation, or to look at satellite imagery and track change over time, or perhaps a pest infested area or a disease spread, something like Phytophthora and those sort of things. That's been monitored with aerial imagery and multispectral imagery and all these sort of things. So image recognition and that sort of form of AI has actually been around for a while. I think the ARB industry, we're a little bit slow at adopting it. When people talk about AI now, they're talking really about generative AI. So generative AI is like a tool that can generate images, text, videos, audio from typically a text prompt. So tools like ChatGPT, which a lot of people, I don't think anyone, unless they've been living under a rock, kind of not heard of ChatGPT. The mainstream media has done a great job of scaremongering people and getting it out there into commonplace knowledge. But essentially, generative AI is kind of the new form of AI. So when you think of AI, it sounds a bit daft to say old traditional AI, which has been around since the 50s, is kind of old in inverted commas, quote unquote. But essentially, generative AI now is like these large language models, ChatGPT, those sort of things. Then there's kind of the next form of AI, which isn't here at the moment, but the term you may start hearing is artificial general intelligence. And that's kind of like the next step or the next evolution from where we are currently with generative AI. And general intelligence basically means it's got the capability of having human-like cognitive thought processes. So it can self-teach, and it can, sort of essentially overcome its own problems. So it's at the moment generative AI is trained, and that's kind of consumed the whole internet, the good and the bad, and that's been its model, and that's what it uses to generate text like ChatGPT or Midjourney and create images and videos and all those sort of things. So they're the kind of three distinct forms of AI, basically. Yeah.
Fascinating. So, can I know this? I love the fact that you are very humble and you say, I'm not an expert, but what you are is a practitioner who's made an
Mm.
effort.
Yeah.
And some of
Yeah.
us haven't made an effort. Although, interestingly, we are in a way using AI now because we're
Mm-hmm.
using Riverside as a
Yep.
podcast platform. And that's really helped us in terms of generating our audio and visual content. And
Yeah.
also, there's a transcript of this podcast. We don't always put that out, but if listeners want that, we can start doing that. And I just find it amazing.
Yeah.
There is a philosophical question about Chat GBT. Is it going to stop our own creativity, or is it a really effective tool to break down barriers for those of us who simply don't like to write?
Yeah, and that's a really good question. I don't think it's going to break down creativity, in the sense that to get anything useful out of ChatGPT or these large language models, which is the sort of collective term for them, so like Claude, Perplexity, all these sort of things, or image generators like Midjourney, it relies on still a text input, or quite increasingly now a sort of dictation. You can talk to it and sort of and provide your input that way, but you still have to like prompt engineer. So you still have to instruct ChatGPT or similar to provide exactly what you want it to provide, because one input in doesn't necessarily mean a good output out. So there are ways of using it, and you'll hear this term like prompt engineering, and there's these jobs popping up quite frequently, like prompt engineering specialists and all these people that can write all these prompts. And essentially, prompt engineering is just understanding how the model works. So it's probably a good question to ask you, actually, Sharon, and others listening.
Yeah.
And if they're listening along in the car, or walking the dog, to think about, like, what's the first search engine you ever used?
I was late to computers and it was Google. And I remember I went back to work after a long career break in the year 2000, and we had
Mm.
computer lessons at the local authority I worked at. And I went to it as a lunchtime session, and the teacher said, there's a good search engine out there and it's called Google.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And
it's
see,
quite sweet now, thinking of it like that.
and it's quite common now for people to say, I don't know, so I'm going to Google it, or I'll go away and Google it.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I mean, I'm showing my age a little bit. I used Ask Jeeves, which was like
Oh,
probably
yes. I remember
1999,
that.
2000, and that shows my age. And there's probably people listening that haven't got a clue what we're on about
Uh,
now with Ask
and
Jeeves,
I
but
remember that.
but I used Ask Jeeves, and I think this is where like the mindset of like using these large language models for like the last 20-25 years, because I mean I was using Ask Jeeves probably year 2000 when I just started secondary school. And obviously the mindset is we put one input in, we get one input out, and there's this competing ads at the top of Google now, and Google's trying to use its algorithm to push quality content right to the top of the page and all that sort of stuff. But essentially, you're going on Google, you're saying, I want a recipe for this, or, what time does my local bank open? You're using it kind of for information gathering. Whereas with large language models or, generative AI, there is an element of you still having to engineer your input and also like train it. So it's no longer this kind of like one input in, one input out like Google. It's much more of a conversation. So to get the best from a large language model, you've really got to sort of teach it to kind of give you what you want. So I go on.
You say
I can
you're
see the cogs turning.
Yeah, I know. You're saying you're teaching this language model to give
Mm,
you what you want. I say that in the first instance, it's teaching you to ask the right questions. Because
exactly.
you and I are having
Yeah.
a conversation and we both have
Mm.
brains. Sometimes it doesn't feel like it.
Yeah.
But so
Yeah.
we can be very quick and reactive, and obviously AI is much faster than us. But I remember my son about a year and a half ago saying, "Mum, there's this amazing thing called Chat GPT," and I said, "Oh, I've heard
Mm.
of it." Ovs.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then he said, "Go on, type in, ask a question." I thought I'm going to break this, so I asked it the question. Um, What's the difference between inner notices spidus decay in London plane and ash, and how do they
Mm.
compartmentalize differently? And it wasn't quite correct. And I went, yes, it's no good, George.
Yeah. And it's really difficult because I get this a lot with people. They'll say to me, "Oh, I tried using it and it was rubbish,"
Yeah.
or it kind of, so that like the term that we use is like hallucinates. So it kind of it's designed to give you an answer. It can't often just turn around. You ask it a question, it says, "I don't know." Like that's not what these are designed for. They're designed to almost be like your personal assistant or a research assistant or an early career professional that's come into a role. It's kind of eager to please you at times. So rather than saying I don't know and looking a bit daft, it'll make up something that it thinks is a decent response. And what you have to remember, and I go back to like my point, is it's consumed all of the internet. So that's the good and the bad. And as we know, there is a lot of rubbish on the internet. There is a lot of information that's not true or includes a lot of biases. So it can't sort of look at all of its information it's been trained and go, actually that's not good. This is a better response, unless we teach it that. So by using it, you may have then got that response and gone, well, that's rubbish because that's not true with that decay organism. But what you could have done, gone back and said, actually, this is, this doesn't appear factually correct. Here is a reputable source, or here's my knowledge. And then from that, it will go away and go, very sorry, let me try and generate a response that is more akin to what you're looking for. So,
So we all have a responsibility to shape AI.
mhm, yeah, massively, massively. I
Fascinating.
think, I think this is the thing. Like when it all comes down, like I say, the best analogy I can give it is like you've took on an assistant, you've took on an early career professional, that person's come into the role. If you just sit them down at the desk and just chuck a load of work at them and say, here you go, in consultancy, you've come out of school or university, you've got a degree or whatever, so we just expect you to reasonably be able to take on this task, here you go. And that person will inevitably drown a little bit. They're going to struggle because they don't know your systems, they don't know your processes, they're not quite sure if it's not clear what you're asking for. They don't know what the role is you want them to provide. And so what you need to do is actually sit with them and say, this is what we're passing you. This is going to build your confidence. we're not expecting you to like really do anything that's going to stretch you too much at this stage. We're just trying to get a sort of baseline of where you are, what your knowledge is. This is the task, this is the role you're performing, this is how we expect it to be delivered back to us. So, maybe a technical report or something similar, or just a concise email or whatever it is. And then from that, they will then come back and say, this is what I've done. And it's a case of then sitting, this sort of thinking of ChatGPT as a person here, but if this was a person, you would then sit them down and say, this is great. I love what you've done here. Perhaps next time think about this, or we could have put more detail here. And that's this kind of iterative process that you've got to go through with ChatGPT. It's about training it in a really specific skill set.
And
It's
are you training it for you? Are you training it for the rest of the world?
So good question. When you're using it, obviously I'm training it for me to get the stuff I want out of it, to help me and assist me in my role. But the more that we then provide feedback and say this isn't quite right, or you've fabricated the truth, or this data you've given me is a little bit biased towards whatever viewpoint you may have, maybe political or else, and you might say we want to stay clear of that for ethical reasons or whatever it is. So when you then give that back, obviously OpenAI, which is the company that owns ChatGPT, they're then using all of that to continue training their model. So the more feedback in part we give, and the more times we say this is right or wrong, or this could be stronger, or actually I don't think this level of detail is necessary, it's learning all the time. Which is why there is this fear with AI, and I kind of get it, that it can't be turned off. We've created a monster that can't be turned off, and mainstream media will have you believe that rise of the machines and we're all going to be out of a job and it's going to take over everything. At this moment in time, and I'm not Nostradamus, I'm not going to make any bold predictions, but at this moment in time, I don't think we're at that stage. I actually think it can add a lot of value, like we've touched on before. Yes, it can also do, in the wrong hands, a lot of horrible things. And I think with the American elections coming up, there is a opportunity for these AI tools to be misused and abused. How they're going to deal with that, I don't know, but staying clear of politics. Essentially, we do have a role to train it. Yeah, we want the right responses for us. Otherwise, what's the point of the tool? But equally, we want the right responses and it being used for the best of mankind, really.
So you're speaking about social responsibility. I absolutely love that. But let's get back to the nitty-gritty. How can one use AI as an ARB consultant in their daily work?
Yeah, so if I think about how I use it, I'd be really honest, I don't think ARB innovators would exist in the form it does today in perhaps the short space of time it has. So I started trading at the start of the year, January the 1st. We're now nearly in September, so 8-9 months. And it's really helped me as an SME or a startup. All of the things that I think about that I've used ChatGPT for, or large language models for, so like SEO, so my keyword research for Google, for writing copy, engaging copy that ranks well for my website, to helping reduce responses or bits of reports, to break down unstructured data and kind of really help analyze all that, even down to simply like doing tender bids. And so the other day I had to price a job and it worked out the distance between each tree and the average time looking at the tree, depending on the condition of the tree from a previous survey that somebody else had done. So all of these things are
Wow, hang
massive
on a
use
minute.
cases. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so how do you? So first of all, I don't quote like that. Mine's where is it? How big is it?
Yeah.
What do I think that will be? And my decision making process is very, very fast. And then I'll put a price out, and I'll either get it or I won't get it. And I'm not cheap, and I don't intend to be cheap. I'm not at
No.
the end of my career. But I'm curious now as how does one physically put in the data to an AI model? Let's say you talked about the previous survey that somebody else had done. You fed that in. I'm imagining, because I'm very simple, you're putting it into a cardboard box with a hole on the top, and or Kenwood food mixer, okay? You're putting into a Kenwood food mixer, you're
Yeah.
putting in the old survey, presumably what you're putting in, the average time you spend per tree, and the distance between each tree and the distance from the
Well,
site to you. Is
well,
that
and
what
that's
you're doing?
yeah. So that's kind of worked out for you. So the way I trained, kind of going back to thinking about these using ChatGPT, and I keep referring to ChatGPT for everyone that's listening. The reason I refer to it is not because I'm sort of biased towards this is the only one I know and use. It's just because it is the best out there. Like they do benchmarking, and there's this constant competition between Google and everyone else, and who's got the best, and Anthropic with Claude, and so every time there's an update, they're always doing these benchmarking, and Google and ChatGPT always comes out on top. Google pipped them a couple of weeks ago, and then they're now back to number one is ChatGPT. So, but what I did in that case was we had the data from the old survey, and we pumped that survey schedule. So you can upload PDFs and documents into
Oh,
ChatGPT,
can you?
and yeah, and it can analyze those documents, and there are certain ways and means of doing that with GPTs, which I can get onto. But so essentially, here's the data. It was all in like a typical tree schedule. This is the condition of the trees, good, fair, poor, like we're all used to as ARBs seeing. And then also they had the mapping. So all I did was bring the mapping into GIS, got the coordinates for each pin, dropped them coordinates into ChatGPT, and said, these are where all the trees are. I need to know the distance between them for travel time and working out my mileage. And then I need an average of how long I'll take looking at trees based on its condition. So if it was a good tree and there was hardly any notes picked up on the last survey, the likelihood is I'll be only looking at that tree for a few minutes. If there was a fair to poor condition, I might spend 6-7 minutes on it. And ChatGPT kind of worked all of that out, and then from that said it will roughly take this long to get around to look at all of these trees. This is how long per tree, and I then just apply my rates to it. And yeah, even the formula so my old school way would have been to put it in Excel and do a formula, but ChatGPT is really good at maths. So if you ask it to then work out a formula to then do all your, here's my rate, this is how long you've worked out per tree, now give me a total, and there you go. It's produced.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's amazing. And so, did you get the job?
And
Sorry,
this is the thing,
John.
like I go back to I started this business, and I think back to, I mean, this has been a long time coming, but I go back 7 or 8 years to when I thought about starting a business, and all the things that you couldn't do then, which we're talking about 7 or 8 years, which is nothing.
Yeah.
Like we're not going back 30 years here. Like building a website, you would have had to get a web designer really, because it was quite a tricky, fiddly thing to do. Writing, copywriting, really sort of attractive text that conveys what you're trying to say in your message on a website and is optimized for search engines. You probably would have had to go to like an SEO specialist and pay for their time and their knowledge essentially. As ChatGPT now does away with most of that. And I'm not saying this like, oh, all of those people are out of job, because actually the SEO experts out there should be utilising ChatGPT, and most of them are now, to cut down on knowledge work. So anything really that's knowledge work can be used for ChatGPT. And I would say to ask yourself as a starting point, if it takes you longer than 5 minutes to do without ChatGPT, then you should consider doing it in ChatGPT.
So, do you use Chat GPT to write paragraphs within your report?
Yes, and this is kind of like a dangerous place that I've had conversations with people. So there are things in ChatGPT called a GPT, which is essentially like its own skilled knowledge worker. And as a paid user of ChatGPT, you can create your own GPT. And I suppose that in lay term, the way to get that across is like it's like an app within ChatGPT that's trained on a very specific skill set, and you can create your own. So I created one for preparing a British Standard 5837 report. And the way you do that is give it a knowledge base. So a bit like the bookshelf behind me, it's basically like here's a library of information that you can call upon to then prepare a BS537 report.
Okay.
And
Can we talk
go on.
about that in a bit more detail?
Mm,
So, um, years ago, there was an advert on TV for Shreddies, which is a breakfast cereal in the UK,
yeah.
and the tag on that was knitted by nanas, and you'd have
Yeah.
an
Yes.
image of nanas or grandmas knitting Shreddies, and the feeling was they were all handmade, which of course they weren't. and there's all a lot of love and effort made in each individual shreddy. So I also think my reports, they take me ages and ages, and it's kind of knitted by, actually, I am almost a nana. I am almost a granny. I've just got another couple of weeks to go. So
Congratulations, by the way.
yeah, thank you. So I sort of take this sort of artisan approach, but really I think I'm a fool listening to you. So tell me about the data that you feed into your personal chat GPT assistant, which you've paid
Mm,
for. I'm imagining
mm.
some sort of, years ago we used to have like a paper clip, you're way too young for that, on the old the word processing units.
Yeah, yeah,
And so I've got this image now, this sort of tiny sort of little assistant. Well, see, I can't help but think it's a person, round glasses on. And what data are you giving this assistant? Obviously, your tree tables. What else?
yeah, yeah. So to make it like a specific report, obviously
Yeah.
you need to give it your data, and yeah, essentially that is just your raw, like a CSV, an Excel
Yes.
spreadsheet with your data in it. Um, One thing that I like really want to touch on or like bring up here before this is like I would never use it to necessarily write the impact assessment.
Oh no,
So
no.
so the impact assessment of BS, I think that still requires, like you were saying, this personal touch.
Yeah.
It's your opinion based on your site observations that you made on site and your experience as a consultant. But large chunks of a BS 537 survey, whether we like to admit it or not, are fairly generic and standardised. So our introduction, generally the same, sets out the scope, what our aims are. That never really changes because it's in accordance with the guidance. Our site description changes per site, but that can all be produced by ChatGPT. And I would say, from a privacy issue, there is no concern with it doing that, because what I do, and this is really for everyone, a message to everyone, is you want to be really careful about sensitive or confidential data. You don't want to be really dropping your client's details, an email address, site address, home address, personal name into ChatGPT. That's something I'd never do.
Good
But a
point.
site description, when you want to describe the local treescape or find who the local authority is, and say for your desk study you've done a check for tree preservation orders and conservation orders, all of that can be done by ChatGPT. And essentially, your results are then produced by ChatGPT because you've gone, here's the raw data, analyze it, tell me some trends, spot correlation, and or describe all the category A trees and ignore the category C because we don't want to go into too much detail about them. And then your AI8 are right, but it kind of again provides the structure for that. So your assumptions, limitations, it can do that bit. And then your conclusion, well, a conclusion is a summary of what the whole contents of the report. So once you've kind of written your report, you can then give it, an overview and say, here you go, this is the report body. Now just conclude or provide me some concluding statements. But
Okay.
I had a conversation with someone about this, and I'm hesitant. So GPTs I can make public, and anybody can put them out there. So any ChatGPT user can then access it. I'm not doing that with this one because my concern is from a ethical point of view that if a developer, and I'm not saying all developers are bad, I know there'll be developers listening, and that's not what I'm saying, but if a developer or a landowner that's been asked for this survey, a BS survey, and an AIA, they may then decide if that GPT was publicly accessible, well, I'll just get this to write it. And that's, to me, not where we should be going with this stuff. Going back to, it should be used as an assistant and used in that way. Ordinarily when I was in companies and I was a part of a team before I went on my own, we would have assistants and junior consultants that we would say, well, you can write the front end of the support, help me draft the AIA, I'll then look at it with you and we'll go through it. And that's kind of what we're going back to here, is that it can aid you in formulating that report, and then there'll be bits where you need to actually, concentrate and put your own thought onto paper, and analyze impacts and make an assessment of the effects and all of that sort of stuff. I think that's still very much got to be done by us. Whether that will change in the future, and I always like playing devil's advocate here, is a very tricky question. So I put something out on LinkedIn about exactly what we're talking about, ChatGPT writing a BS report, and I got people coming back saying, yeah, but AI can't interpret, I don't know, like the feel and the emotion you get from a tree, and how a tree makes a place, a setting, and all of this sort of stuff. And it can't touch on the emotive side of trees and how trees make us feel. That's where we go back to like the future of AI with general intelligence. We are probably going to get to that point where it can. And so then there's a question of what does that mean for the future of some of the reports we produce? I don't know, but
Wow. Wow. Well, I'm going to leave that there because I think this is a fast evolving subject. I mean,
yeah,
I use an assistant to prep and template my reports, and that assistant I married. It's rather a good one.
he's
Anyway,
done a good job. Well done, Mel.
it's brilliant. So let's talk now about
Mm,
photogrammetry and 3D technology. So listeners, do check out Callum Throw on LinkedIn and connect with him because he has some excellent posts with images, some of which you'll be seeing on the screen now. What is it? How do you use it? And what are the
good question.
benefits?
Yeah, yeah. So photogrammetry, it's been around for a while, and I'll sort of say there are people in arboriculture, and have been people in arboriculture, like Andy Luddington, Tree Work Environmental Practice, has been sort of looking at photogrammetry for a while. He did the major oak at Sherwood Forest, and they run a project scanning that. And then also there's the Scatter project, which is kind of in I think in the help of the Ancient Tree Forum, and there's a sort of lidar scanning essentially ancient and veteran trees. Um, Photogrammetry is slightly different to LiDAR. So I know you had Kimberly on recently. She was talking about LiDAR, which is light detection and ranging, essentially a laser light being pulsed loads of times, measuring the time that it takes for that to rebound off a surface, and it generates this sort of point cloud. Photogrammetry, the easiest way to explain it is like a jigsaw. You got all of these photos, a jigsaw piece, and they all come together to form one, big joined up picture. And you collect all your images from different heights and angles, and then essentially it stitches it all together in the software, and you get a 3D model. That's
Okay, you've jumped a step there for me. It's absolutely
okay.
marvelous. So, am I standing there with my phone camera or my camera and just going up and down and around the tree, or is there a gadget where you hold and it spins round? What happens?
Yeah,
I'm as
so
stupid as that. I'm sorry, Callum.
that's okay. No, look, if you're asking the question, somebody
Yeah.
else is asking it. So I think back, 10, 15, 20 years ago, it was quite difficult. You used a camera traditionally. So terrestrial photography, you stood there with a camera, you took a load of photos, you made sure they were overlapping. So you didn't like take a photo and move 10 meters and take another
Yeah.
photo. You were taking lots and lots of photos at very small increments. Then obviously drones became more popular. So then there was this kind of aerial, sort of boom in aerial photogrammetry. And all of a sudden we could get, all the buildings and the skyline and everything else from drones. And then obviously as smartphones have developed, I mean, 10, 15 years, smartphones are now more powerful than the computers you and I kind of grew up with, and like you say, in your first job, learned to work on. So there are a range of apps available now that do all of it for you. So you open up the app, it basically uses your camera, you take loads of photos in the app, you click process, it sends it to their server, process it, and it spits out a 3D model.
So
And it's all now done in app.
you have to download an app. So,
Yeah,
could you just name a couple of those apps and do you have
yeah.
for them?
Yeah, so I've used most of them, which will come as no shock to most people, and I talk about this quite a lot. But the one I use the most is Polycam. So that's a really sort of popular app. It works on Android, it works on iPhone, on the iOS operating system, and it's just a really good app. It's really intuitive and quite simple to use. Like I say, the key to it is taking lots of photos and making sure they're overlapping. The difficulty is, and I'll caveat this, the difficulty with photogrammetry is trees are not easy to create 3D models of. Trees, as you know, move. They sway in the wind, the branches move, the leaves move. And photogrammetry, from one photo to the next, the software is looking for reference points. So when you've got a static object, like say I was scanning a chair, that chair would never move. So in between photos, nothing about that chair is changing. There might be slight changes in light conditions if you're doing it outside, Nothing else is changing. A tree, I'll take a photo and move a step to the side, and that leaf has probably moved 3 or 4 times in the wind. So all of a sudden, the software has a really hard time stitching the photos together. So it works incredibly well for stems, because stems don't really move, and the sort of base of a tree, but the crown it struggles with, and that kind of touches on another bit of tech that we can mention. But in terms of photogrammetry and apps, Polycam is the king, I would say. It's free to use, but there is a limit on how much use you have on it. And I think actually subscription is about £70 for the year, which I would say, if you're going to integrate this into your process and your workflow like I have, then what's £70 really? It's a cup of coffee a month or a couple of cups of coffee. So
Well,
yeah,
I'm going to go for that. You've really, really
yeah,
inspired me to do
good.
that. So, how do you use the data that you have? Do you take a screenshot and put it in a report? Do you use it in team meetings and spin round? How do you use it?
Yeah, so that's a good question in itself, and one that I get asked the most. Because yeah, so there is, if it's a massive area, so say you're doing a 3D model of a whole site and you want to show all of the trees and the treescape and all the buildings around it, then a screenshot might just work as well. You might end up with a screenshot in the report that shows model, but then arguably, if you're going to do that, to me, if you've got a drone in the air to produce that model, you may as well just take a nice drone photo. So screenshots aren't the best way. What I would say is the best way is actually hosting them on an online platform.
Hmm.
So there are lots of platforms out there that allow you to host your 3D models. So Sketchfab is one. Polycam also houses your models. So a link embedded in your report or a QR code, which people can just, when they're reading the report, scan with the phone and it opens it up, is even better.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's typically how I would present it, and we've had this recently. We used Polycam to scan a tree that we did a resistograph, decay detection on an oak tree, and rather than sort of sending them a report or sending the local authority, because this particular tree was subject to a TPO, and we actually had to do it under the 5-day notice because of its such impaired condition. So rather than sending a heavy report with all of the graphs that the resistor graph spits out and loads of appendices, we actually just built a hidden web page on our website, put a 3D model of the tree, and the 3D model we annotated with all the drill points. And when you
Wow.
clicked on one of the annotations, and I'll send Noel a video of this so everyone can see that's watching, but essentially this 3D model had all these annotations on. You clicked on them, and they opened up a dialog box with the printout graph from the resistor graph and our like a paragraph of text on our interpretation of the results. Um, on the web page, we then had the graphs as well, and we sent that to the local authority in an email and said, "Here is everything you need to know. You can look at the 3D model, look around it in 3D space, see the condition of the tree for yourself, and all where we took the readings from." And they approved the 5-day notice. Unfortunately, because the tree was such a beautiful tree, but it was it was in a very bad state in a very high occupancy area, so it had to be dealt with. But yeah, and they actually came back to us saying that they found the website and the web page just so extremely useful. Um, and
Wow.
this is something that John Keeley said to me the other day, that, and he really put it into like this really like surmised it in one line, and he said, "You're trying to get to the truth quicker." And
Yes,
I'd
that's
never thought
brilliant.
about it in that sense. And that, yeah, we're not trying to pull the wool out. I think with a photo, it's very easy. You can have a photo of a tree and it looks like there's nothing wrong with that tree. And then actually you stand back and take another photo and there's a massive soil mound that's been mounded up and they've trenched through all the roots.
Yeah, yeah.
3D models allow people to actually put themselves with the tree and look around it and zoom in and get up close or zoom back and look at the context. And so, yeah, really it's about getting to the truth quicker and helping people visualize results, which is extremely, as you know, it's hard to explain what we do in layperson sim or explain something really technical in a way that a client can understand. Whereas a 3D model, it's kind of, yeah, they can visualize it. So, yeah.
I love that. I love anything. Well done, John Keeley, because I know he's a
Yeah.
listener.
Yeah.
Listen to the truth quicker is really what we should all be doing because the messages we
Yeah.
have need to be heard. And another black and white PDF report isn't as enticing as going on to
No,
something that's colourful, moving, 3D. Well, I'm sold on that. So thank you for that, Callum. Now,
that's all right.
it's not just that you're into the use of VR, AR in
Mm,
arboriculture. That's virtual reality.
mm.
And what's AR?
Augmented reality.
Thought it might be.
Yeah.
Tell us about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I think it's a way of extending the life of your 3D models for starters. So, like we've just said, we've got these 3D models, and people can go on the desktop and move around and click the mouse and drag around and look at it. When you put it into VR, it's this kind of really immersive experience. All of a sudden, all the distractions of the world are gone because you've got this headset on that's, essentially shut out the world, and you're now stood with that tree in a virtual space. And I think one of the issues with virtual reality for a very long time is it kind of peaked too early. The games industry's been using VR for a long time. Like it's not really new in the sense that probably 2011, 12, PlayStation, one of the big players, they brought out VR headsets and you could drive a car in a virtual environment. You're sat in the cockpit with the car, and that was most people's experience of VR, and it made them feel a bit sick. And they probably did a roller coaster simulator, and that made them feel nauseous. And then from that, they thought, well, that's not really for me. Seems a bit of a, it was kind of a step too far. And obviously, around this time, we had smartphones were getting more popular. People were getting used to the concept of having, these kind of, they can zone into a phone and all their information's there. And then there was things like augmented reality filters, so like Snapchat, putting a funny, cute dog on your mum's face through your phone, all that sort of stuff. And Pokemon Go, the kids were chasing imaginary Pokemon around parks. So it kind of gained a bit of traction. And I think now VR is kind of the last sort of great medium, really. I think Apple recently they dropped their Vision Pro, which is essentially a headset that you put on, and it's what's termed as like mixed reality. So rather than me being in a headset and now all the world is shut out, I can actually see through the headset and interact with my real world environment, but also there are virtual elements in the world that I'm in. So it's really hard to explain, but
That sounds
essentially,
like a mind mesh. And actually, isn't there a problem with people multitasking and shortening attention span? But ironically, I haven't got time
yeah,
to talk about that. But so, how is it used for arboriculture? I can think of some applications, but tell me how you use it or would like to use it.
yeah, and I think this is the thing. At the moment, it's not massively used. I did see something recently at the Yorkshire Sculpture Park, and I can't remember who, and I really feel awful if anyone's listening that's been involved in that. But they were essentially they built a sort of VR environment for looking at fungi and looking at trees, and sort of it's hosted up at the Yorkshire Wildlife Park and Sculpture Park, and they've got it up there, and it seems to be a really good thing. It's raising awareness of pests and diseases and kind of biosecurity and all that sort of stuff. So it's a really good application, and I think, like I say, for a long time it's been a bit odd that we put a headset on and you zone out. I think Apple trying to push their Vision Pro and making it much more of this kind of sexy thing. Like the iPhone came along and everyone wanted an iPhone, and I think the amount of money they're pumping into it now shows that there is a real appetite for this. And my opinion for arboriculture is it's massively underutilized. I think when we think about training in particular, it has a huge upside. So if I can film immersive content, so 360 video or spatial video, and I can say put that at the top of the tree with somebody doing rigging, really advanced thing in tree climbing and tree surgery, really hard to teach 16, 17, 18-year olds as they leave school and go into art, the sort of, what to do in this scenario, the safety of that. Here, go and wield a chainsaw and get the top of a tree. It's quite a, well, we all know it's a risky industry. And when you're quite young and your perception of danger is perhaps a bit lower, you tend to take a few risks. So I think if some of that filming, some of that training was put into VR, and those students all sat in a classroom and put that headset on and experienced on the ground first, when they went up into the tree, it's like muscle memory. Okay, we've seen this being done. I've looked at it from this viewpoint, and there's a quite interesting statistic that immersive experiences, virtual reality, you're actually more likely, 4 times more likely to retain knowledge than in a normal classroom setting. And my partner, she's a lecturer, and she has this difficulty. She's a lecturer in countryside and wildlife management, and she has this difficulty that a lot of younger adults, 16, 17, 18-year-olds, are coming into this, and they're distracted by their phone. They struggle to hold concentration. Their mate around them is throwing something at them, or just general kind of this like younger mentality of like, we're not quite ready to work yet, we're not quite ready to be here to learn, and they struggle to hold attention. And actually, by putting a headset on and going into this virtual world, those distractions are removed, because all of a sudden you're putting yourself in this scenario. So for training and education, I think it has massive potential. And one thing, I thought about is like the PTI, the Professional Tree Inspection course. At the times of year that's run, sometimes the fungi that we all want to see and learn about aren't present. But if we have some of these 3D models or a virtual, a spatial video, a 360 video of an inspection of a tree with, say, honey fungus or, Griffula, and it's only there for a couple of weeks and then it's gone and you've missed it, it's faded. If we have a really good video of that and how to inspect that tree, and we've got that forever. So that resource is kind of finite. We don't need to go, oh, actually, here's a picture of it from a textbook that's 25, 30 years old. Here's one that you can actually get up close. You can crouch down at the tree. You can look at. You can pick up if you wanted. We could essentially make that, like, gamify that whole learning process. So yeah.
Oh my goodness.
That's where I want to get to.
I just think that's so compelling and so practical. And it's the advancement of the science of arboriculture in a way
Yeah.
that is very appealing, particularly to the young, well, to all of us. I think
Yeah.
it's really powerful. And it reminds me of a much older episode for Tree Lady Talks with Vanessa Keefe. Yeah. And sorry, I'm just laughing because Noel is holding up a clock to the window to remind me of time. I've decided, listeners, to blow out yoga because I'm due to be going to do my yoga in 10 minutes. I'm sorry, I'm carrying on because it's just too damn sexy, to be honest. I mean, it's just so exciting. So I spoke to Vanessa Keefe and I saw her on a Netflix documentary about our future cities. And she is a professor and an architect. She may not be a professor, but she is an architect. And she's working collaboratively with students in Columbia and New York as well to gamify what our future cities could look like and how they could function in a green infrastructure way and nature-based solutions. And she's finding that using gaming and virtual reality, etc., very, very powerful. So, I just think we know that fungi can be quite difficult to identify apart from the sort of top five, and partly because they are ephemeral, they're seasonal, and to aid our understanding, that's powerful. I hope that
Yeah.
happens. Yeah, that's brilliant. It needs to be less of
Well,
a gimmick, but more mainstream education.
I think it's definitely something that, like I say, is underappreciated as a tool. I think that knowledge retention is key, and I think when you're in that environment where you feel, we all studied that way. I went to Mariswood like 2005, 2006, so everything we did was like a real old presentation. The slide may have been 10 years old. The picture was a bit grainy and hard to see, and it was really, really challenging to kind of learn about fungi. Like I know they did a good job of bringing samples in, and they tried to keep hold of samples, but they were decaying and brittle and falling apart because they'd probably picked them 2 or 3 weeks ago. And so I think if you can have a virtual table with all of these fungi, or one step further is what I'm trying to teach myself at the minute, Unreal, which is a game engine. I'm trying to learn how to essentially make a game that you could then have a woodland with trees that we've scanned in using photogrammetry, and on that tree is a fungal bracket or something that somebody can walk up to in a virtual world and pull that off the tree and look at the spores and what colour are the spores, and does it have tubes, or all these sort of things, all these ideas. Does the crust look like it's thick, or all of these sort of things? Is it covered in moss or slimy, or the texture of it, which I just think if you could hold that in a virtual world in your hand and really examine it, see the tree it came off, the type of habitat it's on, would be far better than just looking at a picture of a fruiting body in a book.
But
I
not as
just,
good.
yeah,
I'm gonna be, devil's
go
advocate
on.
now.
I know what you're
Not
going
as
to
good.
say.
Mud on your boots, perhaps it's raining slightly, you've got rainwater down the back of your neck,
Yeah,
but then you touch the fungi, you smell the fungi, you feel
yeah,
it spongy. So all of that muscle memory, we know that that is the gold
yeah,
standard, and I'm quite sure you
mm,
agree. But this
yeah,
seems to
yeah,
be a sort of middle ground alternative as opposed to just looking in a book. So there is
yeah.
nothing like touch and feel and smell and feel consistency, etc.
Mm,
Wow. Wow, that's really, really interesting. And I want to talk to you next about drones and for
mm,
BS5837 surveys. So listeners around the world, we're talking about a particular type of tree survey for development, but really it could be for any tree survey. And I know in forestry, drones are used for identification of pests and diseases and looking at different
mm-hmm,
sorts of light wave levels coming from tree populations to check out for, say, Phytophthora littoralis or something in, I'm going to have to fact check that, in March, and various other pests and diseases. But in terms of arboriculture, when we're generally looking at smaller populations, tell us about the benefits of using drones and the limitations as well.
yeah. So I think it's kind of easier to start with the limitations. Is that I think the content I'm always cautious that the content I'm putting out on LinkedIn and social media is like we're orb innovators. We use drones and photogrammetry and AI for everything. We don't. I don't, and
Mm.
I certainly don't think it has a use for every aspect of what we do. The limitations are obviously your training and competency, and it's easier than it was. I mean, I started flying and tinkering with drones back in 2014, and you built them yourself, and they were quite clunky, and they weren't great, or they were really expensive to buy an off the shelf one. Now, obviously, training and competency, you can get trained, I would say, and a GVC or an A2 CFC, which are your two kind of, they're not licenses, but they're like a certificate of competency, and you can get them for £300-400 or less now, and that will give you essentially authority to go and fly these drones. And they've made drones smaller and smaller, so if they weigh under a certain amount, their maximum takeoff mass is under a certain amount, then you can fly them in built up areas. And this kind of you still have to obviously be really careful about what you're doing. Don't put anyone in danger, obviously, that's a key thing. But you can fly these small drones in someone's back garden or to inspect a tree. I think a lot of people look at it and go, okay, this is going to be a catch-all, and all of a sudden, aerial assessments with climbing can go out the window because we've got a drone, and that's not the case. Flying a drone through the crown of a tree, quite a complex crown structure, is really hard. Doesn't matter if you're the best pilot in the world; it's really difficult. And a lot of the time, the like DJI drones, the sort of mainstream drones, they have sensors that won't allow you because they're trying to stop you from crashing. There's like collision detection or collision avoidance, so you can't actually get in between branches on a crown because it says, well, no, I'm going to hit something and then it'll crash. So I don't think it's going to do away with kind of area inspection, but what it can do is help with lots of other things like producing really accurate base maps for a survey. So in the absence of a topo, you might use a drone to do essentially surveying, mapping, and they're really accurate. If they're running with sort of corrections from RTK, or like these getting corrections to the so they are how to put that in later, they're in a really accurate position. They're geo-referenced essentially, so every photo it takes, when you then bring it into GIS or AutoCAD, it's in exactly the right place.
Wow.
um, so they can be really good for that. You got no topo, and I think on the BS537, that's currently under review.
So, I mean, I love the idea of drones, and actually, Noel
Mm,
used to fly drones as well, not for the business, but just incredible results.
mm,
So, you use it then, if you're doing your own drone survey, you have the necessary legislation ticked, and then you
mm-hmm,
import that into your mapping system, and then it
mm-hmm,
enables you to accurately plot trees in the absence of
mm-hmm.
topographical survey. But I also think they're so crisply, beautifully visual as well. They
Yeah,
tell a story, don't they, in the report?
yeah.
Any other uses for drones?
Um, well, a bit similar to how forestry have been doing it, really. So you can also use it for NDVI, which is the normalized difference vegetation index.
All right.
So drones equipped with a multispectral camera can do NDVI, and they've been using for years in agriculture and for forestry. And essentially, it's like how green is green. So it's looking for trees that are stressed or sort of low vitality and all that sort of stuff, really. So for like ash dieback surveys and for identifying trees in a stand of trees that may be suffering, they're invaluable for that. And I think for feasibility studies, so British Standard 5837, if you've got a big area of land and you're just doing very high level initial baseline survey and you want to identify your showstoppers, your category A's, potential ancient veteran trees, I think they've got huge potential for really focusing your survey effort. So you can fly over a piece of land from where you stood, within the range that you're allowed to fly, which is no more than sort of, well, visual line of sight, which is usually about 350 meters, but you shouldn't really fly more than 450 to 500 horizontal from you. But you can then target your surveys, so you can tell a ground team or your own team and say, this is where we need to go and have a look. There's some real big trees on that boundary. We probably don't need to look at that because it's hedgerows and shrub mass. So it gives you a much greater scope of sort of doing that baseline and really making efficiencies in your surveying. And obviously, as we've touched on, photogrammetry, 3D models. So our biggest use of them is we use them for doing, instead of a red line plan, to show a site location, we will take a photo of the site, an aerial photo, which gives you much better context than say like an OS map that's been marked up, or really primitive, as daft as this sounds, a 360 photo. So these photospheres that you can create,
Yeah.
I'll often hover it above the middle of a site, directly above, and take a 360 photo, which then when you're in a design team meeting, you can bring that 360 photo up, go onto share screen, and really sort of move around and see the site from above and go, well, that's T1 or that's T3 or,
Wow.
that tree on avoid. So even just as simple as like making it easier for somebody on a design call who's not been to site, say the landscape architect or similar, to just get a kind of overview and a feel of the lay of the land. So really, like it's quite primitive, but
No,
again, really
trust me,
useful.
I'm beginning to think I must go around in a horse and cart in a long travelling dress with my sort of chalkboard. I mean,
Mm,
really amazing stuff. Well, thank you for that. And I like the fact also you want to talk about leveraging social media and industry
mm.
perception.
Yeah, and I think it was one of the questions from, was it Stephen that asked the
Yeah, yeah,
question?
it was actually. We're going to do listeners' questions in a moment,
Okay,
actually.
so we'll get to that. But yeah, I think social media, and this is a sort of gripe I suppose I've had, and I want to say that loosely, but a bit of a gripe I've had with the industry for a while, and I've chatted to people like John Parker about this, and if he's listening, he'll probably recall a few conversations we've had. But I think for a long time we've really undervalued social media. I think we all know there's a bit of a skills shortage and an issue of attracting young people into this industry, and I sort of feel like for a long time it's because we haven't really doubled down on exposure on social media, but in particular we haven't really looked at the platforms that younger people are using, which is these days TikTok, and before TikTok it was predominantly Instagram, and Snapchat, but we'll avoid Snapchat. But TikTok now is a video, essentially just video content. I know you can post other types of content, but it's mainly video. And I don't feel we were really representing the industry very well on social media. And I think it's like this kind of perception of, again, like a little bit of an old school way of thinking that everything we produce has got to be really heavily overly produced, it's got to be heavily edited, it's got to look really professional, and almost comes across a little bit stuffy these days. And actually, what we're trying to do now is get much more. I feel like we should be getting more honest and very authentic content of what the industry is. And that's not just like, you know, if you're a tree surgeon, you're a tree surgeon. If you're a consultant, you're a consultant or a tree officer, and that's really it. There are so many different aspects of this industry, as you know, like, from research, stuff going on in research, to people working in lecturing, to tutoring, to running courses on, chainsaw tickets, Lantra, all of that sort of stuff, all the way through to looking at new technology, innovation in software, all of that stuff, which attracts a much wider demographic of people. And I think tree surgery gets a bit of an over representation because it is kind of the sexy side of the industry. There's only so many times I can take a photo of somebody staring at a tree or putting a tape around it and measuring it before it's
Yeah.
not really that engaging.
No.
Whereas, tree surgery, they're swinging around, they've got the nice shiny kit.
Yeah.
These days it's more of a fashion parade than anything, all the colour coordinated kit and all these fancy colours. And, it's what got me into the industry was like this idea of kind of a bit, this bravado. I'm out with the guys, I'm on site, I'm swinging around, it's very kind of, it's dangerous, it's got that element to it, the sawdust and, and all that noise. And consultancy and tree officers, and that is quite hard to make us quite sexy, really. And
Yeah.
I really don't like using that term, but it's true. Like, it's a bit sort of, the day to day is we go and look at some trees and we write a report. And once you've seen one or two ash trees or oak trees, it's quite hard to keep the content fresh and interesting. But the big thing that gets overlooked, and I think this is a struggle that a lot of people have, is that it doesn't actually need to be that polished. We're all carrying around a phone in our pocket that's got a really good camera that you can pull out. You can record yourself having a bit of a rant or just some observation or something you've read and you thought was really interesting, want to share with the world, and you can record that with one button. You can then open up Instagram or TikTok and click upload, add a bit of text, and click submit, and it's gone. It's into the world. Like, you can literally gain an audience of thousands of people, or put a piece of content out that reaches thousands of people in seconds. And I think people overthink what needs to go on social media. And actually, a lot of the time, keeping it real, being authentic and genuine is really powerful. And like, I know you've had Sarah Dodd on like recently, and she's really made a mark because she's been very candid in her approach to social media. She's gone on, she's done her news bulletins, her kind of updates about the world of trees and law, and she's, made it a little bit more polished in the sense that she's got a bit of a backdrop and all this sort of stuff. But essentially, she's not overthinking it. I think at
Yeah, I
times
know.
she's,
I love what
yeah,
Sarah does, and she's made such a difference to how
yeah,
tree
massively.
law is perceived. In fact, she's got a really good conference coming up. We've had a
Yeah,
couple of adverts for that, and I think there's just a few spaces left, and I'm going to that. And she's wonderful and innovative
yeah.
as well, and actually
And
very open, and that's what we need.
mm,
So, are you on TikTok, Callum? And if so, where can we find you?
I am on TikTok, not so much for business stuff.
Oh, right, okay, personal.
I tend to post a lot about photogrammetry and 3D on there.
Yeah.
I sometimes a bit crazy. I had a really kind of viral video that went a bit mad and nearly 10 million views now
Wow.
for pretending to steal a cookie from a well-known store when actually I just scanned it and bought it. But I suppose I engineered the content to get more views in the sense
Yeah.
that it was a little bit clickbaity. People thought I was stealing a cookie when in fact I wasn't. So there was a few tactics that I employed to get the views. But I think this is the thing I'd say to anyone listening that's like thinking about starting a business or has got a business already. Don't overthink your content and use the tools that you're supposed to. Like, social media is free. Like, the
Yes.
thought of me starting a business 20, 25 years ago, I'd have had to like take an ad out in the yellow pages, which would cost me money.
Yes,
I'd have had to get a
yes.
website built, which would cost me money. Now you don't even really need a website. If you've got a good community of followers on a
Yes.
social platform and you're posting photos of the work you've done or a nice site you're on or a tree you've found, essentially that's free. It's free reach. And I can't stress this enough. Like, I get people saying, "Oh, we tried social media and we put a couple of posts and it didn't do very well," and they sort of blame the tool. They blame Instagram or they blame the platform. They blame TikTok. We tried it; it didn't really work. And I always say to them, "Well, you only tried once or twice. You've got to be consistent. You've got to keep posting stuff, but also you need to kind of be quite self-critical and go, well, if it didn't work and didn't get views, it's not necessarily the platform. It might be because the content we produce just didn't really add value. And I think, like, going back to Sarah, like, she does add value. She
It
shares
does.
insight. She shares knowledge. And so if I'm scrolling through my
Sorry,
feed,
talk
and my
to me.
time's precious, like my time to me is precious. If you're going to stop me scrolling, I want it to add value to my life. Like, and it sounds really daft, but that's how most people now using social media think. You've got to grab their attention, because they are scrolling at such speed that if you don't grab their attention and give them value, then they're not going to watch it. They're not going to engage with it. And I think for a long time, this isn't just our industry, this is other industries, we've been very like sales DNA. Like, we've put a post out that's been like, here we are on this wonderful site for this client. If you need a tree survey, call me because I'm the best. Like, it's been very kind of like, it's almost been like running an ad, but I'm doing it for free. And actually, what would be better there is to show, this is what we do, this is how we do it, this is perhaps like why we do it this way, and share an insight into like the behind the scenes. Here's some such and such at our company, and she's been with us 10 years, or he's been with us 5 years, and he's recently passed this, and we're really proud of them. Like, showing the behind the scenes, and
Yes,
kind of
people want that.
being quite humble, and quite, having a bit of humility, and sometimes showing the mistakes,
I,
showing that
yeah.
things don't always go wrong, right? We all make mistakes.
Yeah, of course we do, and we make mistakes on Tree Lady Talks actually as well. And this is not an overly polished production, obviously. I mean, I'm very lucky with the work that Noel does, but it's pretty raw and it's pretty instinctive
Mm,
and it's honest. And this is my platform, as it were. So I think that's really powerful message. And I think also people want that sense of community. They don't want to
yeah.
just consume product. They want to consume the community sense, for part of something. They want to find out more about the personal side of things. And that's
Mm,
really, really powerful. Brilliant.
yeah. I've actually got. Sorry to cut you off, Sharon.
That's
I've
right.
actually got a decent book
Yeah.
recommendation, which is behind me. This book is called "Community is Your Currency," and this is
Ah,
by somebody called Daisy Morris. And I would say this is a really good book. This is one I've read recently. But this is
okay.
all about essentially creating an engaged following.
Oh, I
So,
think I need to read
not
that.
yeah, not chasing followers and likes. It's about engagement, and engagement is king. And that's kind of going back to like the industry. We shouldn't be chasing kind of likes, or how many people are following us. We need an engaged audience. And
Yes.
yeah, I,
Oh,
I just think,
yeah,
go on.
Callum. So tell us that book title and the author again, and hold
So
it
it's
up for the
community is your
camera.
yeah community is your currency. And Daisy Morris is the author.
Brilliant. Funny you
Yeah.
should say that. Neatly segueing, almost as if I'm professional. It's time for listeners' questions.
Great.
So,
Yeah, hit the room.
I love this feature, and we're so grateful that people do reach out to us and ask questions. So, for those of you who don't know about this, if you follow me on LinkedIn, Sharon Durden Hollenby, and connect with me, then you'll see my posts come up just before, a few days before I'm interviewing somebody. And I say, what would you like to ask them? So, we've had a good response this week. And
Good.
so this is from Bob Catchpole, ARB officer at Broxbourne Council in the UK. Hi Sharon, I have a question regarding technology. We have apps that now identify trees, shrubs, etc. Does Callum think there will eventually be an AI or an app that scans trees and identifies defects? And if so, how reliable would it be? So, do you think we could just be really lazy and just hold our phone up to a tree and it will say what's wrong with it?
Uh, Good question. Possibly yes. Uh, from the sense of the structure of a tree, yeah, I think so. And there are already companies working on that. So there's a company called Hill that are doing LiDAR scanning. They're driving around with essentially like a Google Street View car, but strapped with loads of LiDAR. And then it's basically looking at street trees and for asset management. So they're picking up things like the shape of the crown, so they can work out wind loading and all of those sort of things, and they can work out canopy cover, and they can work out carbon sequestration from that. Is the idea? I've been on their webinar, but I've not seen it in real life. And then there is Adbian. They're doing stuff on using essentially like Polycam, but through their own app, to do a photogrammetry scan of a tree, and from that then work out a safety factor. So there is already stuff happening
Wow.
like that. I don't think it'd be too challenging in the sense that if you can kind of, if you do a LiDAR scan of a tree or a photograph scan, you can then see that the mesh model it produces, there may be a cavity. So there'll be an indent and a cavity. And I don't think we're far off working out, say, what the extent of that cavity is and what that means for the structure of the tree based on its height and its crown spread and all of that stuff. Like, essentially, we're doing that now manually. So with the tools at our disposal, there is no reason why we couldn't do that. And like I say, there are some companies out there that are well worth checking out that are kind of, yeah, working in that space really.
I love that. Wow. And I've got a question again from Francis Hesketh. So Francis asks, can AI be used to generate weather forecasts in sufficient detail to enable the road, rail, arboricultural industry to get ahead of wind and storm events?
Again, good question. I mean, they're already using, like predicting the weather is a form of AI or machine learning. So they look at satellite data and try and predict where it's going, where that storm or that hurricane might hit. So they're tracking lots of different things that might affect that. So the answer is, I would say it's already happening. Whether there'd be a tool that, say, packaged all of that up to go, like a tree alert tool that said this weather's going to hit this area, and if you've got, trees of this size or in isolated positions or on top of a hillside, they're more expensive. I kind of think that already happens. Like when you go on BBC Weather and they say there's a risk of a storm, and it says any exposed areas, or if you're in the Scottish Highlands, avoid walking through forests, plantations, or something. So I kind of think that already happens. And I apologise to Francis because I'm not an expert in that area. So that's the best I can do with answering that one.
No, I thought that was a really, really great answer. And Stephen Westmore, who's trustee of the Arboricultural Association, has come in with 4 questions. And actually, I think you've
Yeah.
answered most of them, actually. But I'm just going to ask one of yours. Apologies, Steve, but it's been quite a full conversation. Can you use AI to monitor live planning applications and notify, presumably the ARB consultant, when a decision has been made? That's a good one. I would like that.
Yeah. Possibly again is the answer because if you trained your own GPT on ChatGPT to analyze updates on a website, then yes. Because one of the issues with ChatGPT is that the knowledge cutoff is October 2023.
Mm-hmm.
So if you ask it anything current, so can you tell me about this planning application in the last month, it will say no because it just doesn't have that knowledge. The
Okay.
way to bypass that is to use a GPT that has access to the internet, and
Yeah.
therefore you could, in theory, say, "This is my, where my planning application is." So I don't know, whatever council, Nottingham City Council in my instance, or North Kesteven or someone, and this is the planning application reference. This is the web address you'd access that. Can you track for any updates to that website? I think that theoretically is possible. I've never tried it, but I think it would be
Interesting.
possible. But the slight issue, like I say, with like the free version of or the basic version of ChatGPT is its knowledge stops at October 2023. So essentially, it's nearly a year out of date, the knowledge it's trained on. And yeah, there are ways and means about that. So there was a good question asked by Stephen that I kind of wanted to address, and he said about
I've got.
how do we get more young people into
Yes,
the
you did.
industry. It
I
was a
kind
question
of
to
felt
do.
you covered that, but
Yeah,
yeah,
I
briefly.
think yeah, briefly, I think it goes back to VR. So yeah, we have touched on it, and I think if we could showcase different aspects of the industry in 360 immersive video and bring all of that together in say a 3 or 4 minute video, and when kids come to these careers events or we go into schools, rather than standing at the front and showing them a slideshow or taking in, some free handouts and leaflets and talking to them about the industry, or maybe a chainsaw on a table, that sort of stuff, the traditional careers fair stuff we tend to do, if we could have essentially an overview of the industry in a headset that people put on and can sit in a chair and see a 30-second clip of somebody at the top of a tree swinging around, 30 seconds of somebody liaising with the local authority, stood at the front of a meeting, talking to the public at a consultation, then 20 seconds of somebody wanging something through a chipper. All of those different
I love
aspects,
that.
consultancy, surveying. I just think that would be much more immersive. And I think, particularly, I know, like going back to the tree surgery world, it is the kind of nicer side or the kind of more fun side when you're a kid. That seems quite cool, playing with chainsaws. So if you could put them in the point of view of somebody holding a chainsaw and now all of a sudden they're cutting a log and then they're up a tree, and I just think that would be a far more engaging way of showing what we do, like a careers in a box, rather than a standing talking presentation. So
Brilliant. I mean, there are some
yeah,
excellent videos produced by the Cultural Association and the Institute of
yeah,
Charter Foresters. Really good.
yeah,
But immersive, the next stage.
mm,
Brilliant, brilliant.
yeah.
Well, we have time for Noel's question of the week. It's just a short one. So, our podcasting platform, Riverside, produces a transcript. What word does it not know how to spell?
Out of everything we've talked about and the concept, I would hazard a guess that it's arboriculture.
Yay! Doesn't know.
Yeah.
Ha! Well, Callum, you've absolutely opened my eyes and my heart and my mind to using more
Mm,
technology. I've been stuck in my ways, but you have shone a light on future
thank you.
possibilities for
Yeah.
us all, which I believe is really necessary to be more impactful in our communication, to show how trees and nature are absolutely fundamental. And we've got to do that in new ways. And you seem to be ahead of the
Mm,
curve. I love your humility that you're not an expert, but what you are is an experimental practitioner who's willing to share. Callum Pro
mm.
from ARB Innovators, thank you so much for your time.
No, thank you very much, Sharon. Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure, and yeah, hopefully people take a lot of value from it. So
It's been a very wow, wow, wow podcast from me. Unbelievable, to quote Kate Bush. Thank you very
that's great.
much.